Presentations that were presented by the HIV/AIDS and Substance Abuse Interdisciplinary Work Group. The work group is sponsored and funded by the University of South Carolina College of Social Work. And this work group is a collaboration among researchers, scholars, and community stakeholders and students from the University of South Carolina, University of Georgia, Duke University, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, North Carolina A&T State University, and Georgia Southern. Our goals are to increase awareness of HIV/AIDS in the South among faculty, staff, and students here, and community members, develop collaborative relationships with HIV/AIDS service organizations in the South, and develop a community-engaged response that facilitates interdisciplinary collaboration between faculty, students, community stakeholders regarding the needs of the HIV/AIDS community, and to identify potential best practices to reach at-risk persons who could benefit from HIV testing and the HIV care continuum. To facilitate these goals, we have 3 panelists with us this evening from HIV/AIDS service organizations in North Carolina and South Carolina. Our first panelist is Carmen Hampton-Julius. She's an alum from the University of South Carolina College of Social Work, and she serves as Chief Executive Officer of PALS, the Departmental AIDS Life Support Services. Her expertise includes extensive experience providing case management, prevention services, behavioral health counseling, program development and evaluation, as well as organizational development and management. Ms. Julius earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Psychology and in Rehabilitation Counseling from Wilberforce University in Ohio, and a Master's of Social Work from the University of South Carolina. She received a certificate in nonprofit management from Wood University and a certificate in healthcare leadership from the University of California at Los Angeles, the Anderson School. Our next panelist is Adana Holloway. She's a PharmD, a clinical pharmacist at the C.W. Williams Community Health Center. Dr. Holloway is a graduate of Clemson University and received her Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Presbyterian College School of Pharmacy, and then completed her pharmacy residency in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's always had a passion for the underserved, and it was the same passion that drove her to the C.W. Williams Clinic, where she now is the Director for Quality for the Ryan White program. She works with patients, practitioners, and students to provide education on HIV/AIDS. Our next panelist is Raymond Todd. He's a nurse practitioner. He was born in Cameroon, Central Africa, and graduated from law school in Cameroon and moved to the U.S. in 2001. He worked as a nurse for 10 years in various disciplines before returning to graduate school, and he graduated from the Queen's University of Charlotte, UNC Charlotte, and Maryville University. He has worked as a family nurse practitioner at C.W. Williams Charlotte with a focus in HIV/AIDS clinical care and prevention and hepatitis C treatment. And our moderator for this evening is Dr. Llewellyn Cornelius. He is the Donald Howell Distinguished Professor of Social Justice and Civil Rights Studies and the Director of the Center for Social Justice, Human and Civil Rights at the University of Georgia. As a health disparities and community-based participatory researcher, Dr. C is passionate about vulnerable populations and equitable access to care for the underserved and the uninsured. His passion is reflected in his national and international research and scholarship on substance abuse and HIV/AIDS, and from his past work evaluating a new exchange project for HIV/AIDS and individual drug users in Baltimore, and work with Native American communities on the Maryland Eastern Shore, to his current research project with HIV/AIDS positive mothers and HIV positive adolescents in Nigeria. We'd like for you to welcome our panelists and our moderator this evening. And I'll now turn it over to Dr. Cornelius.
Just a couple of quick comments before moving forward. First of all, thank you. It is the evening. I know you could be any other place other than here. And one of the ways to think about this is, I know we have all been affected by what's been going on for the last 4 decades. And we've had folk who have lost each other, who have been hurt, who have been discriminated against. And our challenge is, what becomes the long game? How do we support each other in the communities that we live in and move forward in a way that can make change and sustain the change process? I do not know what's going to happen over the next 2 hours. I know that we have some questions of the panelists and also space for you in the audience to participate. I hope that we focus more on using words like and as opposed to but. you know, how do we add as opposed to subtract? May not be easy because we might get in touch with our feelings, and that's a good thing. I like feelings. You already heard me announce about folks becoming more close. What I'd like to do is, and while we had some things in mind, I'm really kind of flexible about the space. It's really about stimulating conversation. It's not about saying that any of us, you know, came down from the bottom, we have the answers. If we all had the answers, we wouldn't meet tonight. For real. So what I'd like to do is I'll start with one of the questions and see what conversation we could have on the panel and what we could pick up from the audience and what have you. What we tried to do was to really think about the kind of questions that are really pressing within the community, and there are things that just aren't going away. And to start, I'd like to start out with one of the questions of dealing with the faith community. We know that there are ways in which the faith community has been helping and has not. And so one of the questions that we're really trying to wrestle with is how do we work around segments of the faith community that are just not getting it in terms of this is something that can affect everybody. You know, how do we get them to say, you know, wow, let's see us all as humans and work together? Would you ever like to dive in, pretend this is the Olympics and go for it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating.
Oh, were we supposed to have introductions of the panelists? So what was all the, make sure be fair. Okay, go ahead.
My name is Raymond. I think when she was reading it, maybe some people didn't know exactly, because there was no show of hands. She showed her hand, but I didn't show my hand. I apologize for that. So my name is Raymond Ta. I work with Dr. Holiday at CoSW Williams. It's a federally qualified community health center in Charlotte. And we provide family care services, and we provide HIV care services to everybody. We have Round-Wide, hopefully Round-Wide is a federal program, it's like a federal insurance program. It covers people who don't have money or who don't have enough money, people who don't have insurance, don't have a job, and it helps them get clinical care, and it also supports families of members of people who are affected by HIV. So I provide that care, clinical care, and then we have outreach, people who go out into the communities and try to talk about HIV, do testing, and then bring people back into the center so we can provide care to them. I'm the Round-Wide coordinator at CoSW Williams. It's a fascinating issue to discuss. I come from a Christian background, and I can tell you that from my own upbringing in Cameroon, which is in Africa, the issue of stigma, it's not something that any one person or any one country has monopoly over. It's widespread, it's across the world. And it's something that we have to come together to fight against. I use the word fight purposefully because we've been talking about it and struggling with it, and it's not going anywhere. It seemed to me the idea about fighting for cancer seemed to be important. It seems like people are winning when they use the word fight. So that's why I've chosen to use the word fight too when it comes to HIV prevention and care. I also think that sometimes we've been very critical about the faith community. And instead of telling them, maybe giving them advice on what they need to do, my suspicion is that sometimes they don't know what to do. And if you don't know what to do, sometimes you retreat to a point where you're more comfortable. You don't want to talk about things that you're ignorant about. You don't want to talk about things that you don't have any strategy. I think those of us in the community who are interested in HIV, no matter your role, we need to approach them with some strategies. We can identify places where they can be helpful and point out to them that this is where we think we can help. Instead of just throwing it to them and say, well, you're not doing anything, you need to be doing something. What is something? You know, we need to give them the tools, we need to give them information, and then let them refuse. And then at that point, we could be critical. I think we've been a lot more critical too than we have been helpful. So they might talk about that again later on.
Yeah, I agree with our role needs to be assisting clergy and leaders of faith communities in developing strategies. I think we have to acknowledge that it is difficult for clergy leaders to introduce the subject of sex and sexual orientation and condoms and condom use. It is a challenge. In some faith communities, the leader's word is it. In some faith communities, if you say the wrong thing, you're out the door on some skates. So, you know, I think we have to be in a role of being helpful and supportive in educating clergy. So clergy then allow us to educate their congregation. And we have to really think about what are the norms in these congregations? What are the norms about HIV and people living with HIV and sexual orientation? And you know, that's, it takes more than a Band-Aid approach. It takes more than just looking at the leader of the faith community. It takes looking at the faith community as a whole and figuring out what we can do to be helpful, what we can do to build capacity.
Now, is some of that tied to expectations like the idea of the faith community and churches serving as social service organizations that they've done for a long time? And now here we have other services and churches moving out of that space, and now we're trying to pull them back into that. In other words, is part of that something where we're like, wait a minute, you used to do this. Our grandparents used to come to you more than just for praying. You came for everything, food, housing, and what have you. And now we're saying we want you to tune into us in a spiritual way for our health needs.
And I think that's a good point. Churches were always suited or always positioned to work with issues of poverty, not necessarily issues of health. And I think that takes some retraining, some capacity building, and some support that we just may have not provided to the extent that is needed.
I definitely agree with that. A lot of times I feel like what happens is education is associated with support. And the idea that if I educate you about this, this means I agree with it. And that's not always the case. Because what happens is we need to provide the education so that the person has enough information to make a decision, an informed decision. And what happens a lot of times is that no education is provided because it is a touchy subject for the faith community. And because for years the faith community has been tied to poverty. It's a lot of times you have the narrative that if you have nothing, you have whatever your deity being may be. That's all that they have. And so for a long time, patients have associated their deity with when I don't have anything left. They've associated that with their faith. And so when you cross over into the church community or the faith community and you're expecting them to deal with these issues, I would say it is to a certain extent their job. But because we have all these other resources, it's also our responsibility to make sure they have the tools. And if they decide not to touch that subject, we also have to respect that as well, but be able to provide the education that they want. So I think it really leans on us to be flexible because we have to be able to fill in the gaps where they are and identify them.
Have churches changed? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was thinking about the change in demographics where people live. And as part of having the involvement of the church, the fact that people live so far and spread out now, that before the church was in the community and it was at that small group of people, so there was relationship. But now there's not relationship. And so I think it makes it difficult to have a conversation with the congregation or people when you don't have relationship. So is there even a way that we can, in some way, offer to them how we reconnect you with the community and build relationships?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And what I would add to that is that everyone sitting here, everyone in the community has a role. Because the faith community is not a stone sitting somewhere. Everyone, we're in the South. I think maybe 1 in 4 people goes to church or is a Christian in the South or is attached to some kind of a religious faith. That push has to come from the consciousness of each and every one of us. She made a very interesting point. The clergy are not working for free, they're employed. They're concerned about saying something on the pulpit, and then the next Monday or the next Sunday, they don't have a job. So it takes those of us who attend that church to encourage them, to give them the power, the authority to say, you can talk about this from the pulpit, and we'll support you. If that doesn't happen from us, and we're only waiting for them to do it, it's gonna take a long time. You know, and you have to get the faith community to talk to each other. There's so many different denominations. Although they're all faith communities, there are variations in what they believe. A lot of them we need to find ways to bring them like this, just bring people of the faith community without us for them to talk together, you know, and see how they can bridge some of their own differences, and then they can adopt some of the things we're talking about.
Yes.
Briefly, I hear the conversation, I remember that a long time ago, some of that conversation. And having been in HIV since the beginning of the epidemic, but on a national perspective, and now moving back down to South Carolina, I still see some of the things with the faith-based organizations. In fact, many of them here that I've seen and I have been to have health ministries. And it's not that they are trying to get away from, it's not that all of them are trying to get away from HIV. They're finding their comfort zone within the discussion around HIV. And sometimes the comfort zone is not the prescribed HIV 101 education going down the line, blah, 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 you must do this. It's within their construct of their beliefs, their relationship with people, and how that's brought into the church through the health ministries. I know I talked in my mom's church one time. I came down, I'm ex-fan. So I came down and talked to my mom's church one time, and the pastor brought me in, but he told me what words I couldn't use. And that was okay, because when you're talking about something that's a life-ending disease, and you learn how to use words that everybody understands without using the words that cause conflict within the church. So I think it's it's within our expertise and our mission to be partners with the faith-based community in the ways that works for them. And everybody will not accept everything you say and won't accept some of the words that you would like to say. But everybody knows that Mary had a baby and she was a virgin. Everybody knows that. So I'm just adding to the conversation.
One of the things that we can consider in terms of looking at solutions is how do we frame this? If we frame it around sex, we know we're going to run into a brick wall. If we frame this around health and taking care of the people in our communities and our environments, that's a different conversation that you have going in. So some of the things that we've done in Jackson, Mississippi was we wanted to actually partner with clergy. And we had a summit, and at that time we looked at the HIV care continuum as a part of an educational piece and helping them to understand, but choosing how we frame it.
And I just want to say, Dr. Goins, thank you for your comment, because you said some key words, partnership and collaboration. A lot of times when we meet and discuss HIV, we don't have clergy in the room. We don't have law enforcement in the room. We don't have prison officials in the room. We don't have the folk in the room who can inform the conversation and who can make this a part of their strategy, make HIV prevention and HIV education a part of their strategy, a part of their everyday life. So we need to stop separating clergy out and bring them into the table.
That's a note for us too.
Yeah.
In this room.
Oh, yeah.
Right, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In the back?
Yes, I just wanted to piggyback on what Ms. Francis and the lady from Mississippi said, and what the doctor up there was saying. A lot of this also goes back to there's still stigma here in the South attached to having HIV. A lot of people still associate it as just being a gay person's disease, a gay man's disease. And it goes back to, we need to educate them that it doesn't just affect gay people, it can affect anybody, it can affect heterosexuals, it's affecting black women at a rapid rate. So I think it all goes back to educating the clergy, and like Ms. Francis said, getting with these people on the health ministries, the mother of the church, because the pastor may say one thing, and the mother of the church say, no, no, no.
Right.
The mother of the church wins. So I think it all goes back to educating in the right way, framing the conversations in the right way.
I think a big part of that is changing the perspective as well. And that includes changing our perspective, because a lot of times we work in silos. It's true in the faith community. They work in silos. As Mr. Charles said, they work in this denomination, we do this, my church does this, or I have a mega church and I don't really know who's there, versus I have, 25 members and I know each one of them by name, and I know who didn't come this Sunday, or, if you step outside of my synagogue, those different things. We have our silos, and we have to change that perspective. Because sometimes when we work with our patients every day, we see that HIV is affecting anyone. We see that you have a generation of people who don't remember how bad HIV was. And they're getting to the point where they think, oh, I can just take one pill a day, it's not that bad. And that's an issue. That's on us to provide that education. The ones of us who've worked with it, the ones of us who've been around, we saw people drop like flies when there was not a treatment for them. And now we have to provide the education, because you see the ones who also remember the first drugs that came out. I'm sorry, I'm a pharmacist by trade. So the ones who remember the drugs that came out and said, I would rather die with the disease than take this medication. So it's all of those things that we have to take into account when we go to them, and we're changing the perspective. We're framing it around health. How do you deal with your member that now comes to you and tells you they have HIV? Other than, I'll pray for you. You have to provide something. You have to give them the tools and tell them, how are we going to make this better? Not necessarily better in terms of helping that person feel better, but how do you take what we believe and incorporate that into, how can I help you be a healthy person? That is what faith is. You're giving someone hope that there's something else in this world other than what they see. And so if you can tie that to their health and show them that your life hasn't ended, or this is something you need to be aware of, or this is going to stop the growth or the excitement or whatever in your life, that is how you get on their side. Not necessarily, but that's how you change the narrative. It's changing that perspective and reframing.
Now, I want to make sure before moving on that I capture all the questions from responses from the audience. I see one hand here. I want to make sure if there's anybody else in the back that wants to chime in too. So please continue for a little bit, please.
The last comment that I would make is, I totally agree with you that we have to reframe how we do this. But we also have to be aware of how the church operates.
Yes.
We have to educate ourselves first
Yes.
before we go into their homes and we go into their churches, and making sure that we have an understanding. And that's going to vary from denomination to denomination. And that's going to take extra work on our part.
So when I hear, and probably adding to what the lady in the back talked about, the clergy is not the absolute leader of the church. I get the impression that there are stronger people in the church, maybe the deacons, the influential, the mom, the choir. Why don't we strategize around those people?
Yeah.
We can go to those people independently, invite them to some of these conversations, and talk to them. Perhaps if we're able to get buy-in from them, they're the ones that can convince the clergy or the other members. I'm sure churches have policies. I mean, I've gone to a lot of different churches. I've moved around a lot. HIV doesn't end at the door of the church. It's inside the church. I hear a lot of people making prayers. They read people's names on Sundays. They're in the hospital. They have congestive heart failure. Pray for them. They have lung cancer. They have diabetes. I rarely hear to say, oh, pray for Mr. This who has HIV. I don't think I've ever heard that in the church. Why can't we hear that?
And I feel like a lot of times our patients still have that shame that's associated with HIV. They don't want to share.
Yes.
They don't want to tell someone this is how I was diagnosed with HIV, this is my story, this is what happened. It's almost that weight is still on them as a patient. And so for them to even stand up, and you will have a few, but for them to stand up and face a group of people who told them their whole lives they're not supposed to do certain things, and to admit that they have done that and now they have a result. Remember, in the South, HIV was seen as a punishment. It said you did something, you were a bad person, and God punished you, and this is what happened. And what I feel a lot of is it has to be some sensitivity, some cultural sensitivity, some faith sensitivity, for us to learn these cultures, not just the Christian faith. We have to think of all the other faiths, all the other organizations and what they believe, and incorporate those as well.
And churches are community-based organizations. It's not just the individual in that church. Your family may have attended that church for generations. Great granddaddy was the pastor. Grandma's now the mother of the church. So and so disclosing that information affects not just that person, but may affect the entire family and even the community. So it's a challenge. It's complex, and we have some work to do. I do want to give credit where credit is due. Churches have come a ways. Churches have come a ways over 30 years. We got a long way to go, but we've come a ways. So we know that there can be success in the faith community. Yes.
So I'm going to move to the next question, which gets to advocacy around funding for HIV services. Now, we're finding that with the Ryan White program, they are shifting around funds out of rural communities and emphasizing urban communities. And as we speak, we're watching the federal legislation that's literally cutting programs left and right under our nose. And so the question becomes, here we have an initiative that's working across several states. How do we come together across jurisdiction to advocate, rather than to have it affect one pocket of the state, another pocket of the state, and everybody's catching a mess? How do we come together to really get to the pressure points to make sure that there's sustained funding for HIV services in the South?
Well, I think the first part of our conversation was really critical, because we all understand the role of the church and the power that the church has in the community and in society. It says right there on the money, on the U.S. money, everywhere, even in the U.S. Senate, they pray before they start their session. So the church has a powerful role to play. That's why I keep saying that first part of our conversation is critical. If we can get those people, the faith-based community organizations and the churches and the people who are in there, to join the rest of society, healthcare organizations, small clinics, hospitals, healthcare centers, to advocate for funding. And the only way we do that is if the politicians see that all of these people are involved. We cannot separate the politics from everything else we do in this country. Every decision is a political decision. So we have to look at that in that light. Not that we're changing the church to become a political organization, but we have to get them on our side. And I think the second thing too we have to do is, every time you duplicate services, or every time you duplicate a strategy, which you're creating over here, somebody's creating on the other side, it costs money. Those who are applying for funding have to come together and perhaps reduce the negative competition that exists. I'm doing something over here that's working, and I don't want to share it with the other person, because I want to be that organization in the community that everybody says, oh, they're successful at doing it. I want to be the big dog in the community. It's not necessary. It's about providing services to people. If we can share those strategies with smaller organizations that have smaller resources, and we can team up together and write bigger grants, write better grants, and maybe be able to get better funding. So we need to work together. Those people with the groups that are in HIV clinics and hospitals and community organizations, they need to come together to strategize, not people doing it individually. We're too small to fight alone. We need to come together.
And I think I think that there's a lot of challenges in that, and I guess it comes from a policy level. It's very, we know that we're stronger together. We got that, right? We got that? Stronger together.
Or newsflash,
Right?
Just in case you don't know,
We're
tonight
stronger
you know that we're
together.
stronger together, right?
You know, and I understand that we all understand that collaboration is hard when it's done well. It's hard. It's hard. But the challenge is, it is hard to collaborate on Monday and compete on Tuesday. Okay? These funders dangle carrots, right? Right? We're only gonna fund one organization in this state. You're only gonna fund one organization in this region. So we're out here scrapping, because the truth is, we all got landlords, right? We all need to flick the switch and let the lights come on, correct? Okay, so, you know, we have some complex challenges, particularly in a smaller state like South Carolina, where 16 miles from where we sit, we're in a rural area, you know, where they don't have the University of South Carolina, where they don't have the Palmetto Health System, where people have to drive for miles to get health care and to get human services. You know, my clients tell me 5 miles in Columbia isn't as far as 5 miles in Lower Richland County. Okay? So, you know, though we, I think, collaborate and partner as well as we can, when it comes to funding and resources, they're slim, they're narrow, they're none. And we have to figure out how to take those resources and make them work for all of us. We all have populations that we need to work with. So, you know, the pendulum swings. Today it's African American men. Tomorrow it's substance users. The next day it's, you know, women of color. You know, how do we figure out how to stretch those resources throughout a coalition of committed providers who are not so concerned about geographic lines, who are not so concerned about, you know, who gets to be in the state paper tomorrow.
You know, as you're talking, I've heard a wrinkle of this conversation in another space of you have 200 community organizations all going after the same thing as opposed to having like a community trust, so to speak. Is there a need for some kind of like, let's just take here for HIV/AIDS service delivery. Is there a need for some type of umbrella trust that serves that function of bringing all these organizations together to, you know, to do that? In other words, how do we get past the silo game? And I'm not asking anything that's an easy, these are not easy, these are not easy questions. We're purposely asking tough questions that we're all trying to wrestle with. And I see a hand all the way up there.
Sorry, I came in a little late. I'm actually at an HIV clinic, and we're in the midst of ACA enrollment, as I'm sure a lot of you are. And not to make this a political conversation, but everybody kind of feels this impending doom because of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen in a year, 2 years, or 3 years, or if over 500 of our clients who are on ACA currently will be covered. And the days before ACA, I was not a part of the clinic, but I'm told it was very dark days. So as someone new coming in, I'm looking around and everybody's just like, well, this is what's happening now. We're just going to keep our heads down and enroll people and hope it goes well, but we don't have any kind of plan. So in terms of the trust, it would be nice if some sort of collaboration could happen to where we're planning right now for what that impending doom may or may not be. So there's nothing in place right now, at least where I am.
So thank you. I'm just going to push the envelope a little bit. Here's one of our challenges. The United States is still one of the wealthiest nations in the world. We don't do what is called the concept of sovereign wealth. You know what sovereign wealth is? An example, when you look at Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, they take the proceeds from the oil in the sea above them and they regenerate it into the economy, but we don't. And so part of the issue gets into, we're talking framing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to scramble at the crumbs as opposed to shifting what the cake looks like.
Yes.
So, so I hear you, And the push is, well, how much of that crumb do we do? And at the same time, how much of it is like, I mean, let's play this out here. The activity in the federal government is to move the money into the defense budget. That's when you look at the big shift, the shift is to move things, and this ain't the first time this has happened, where they're moving money out of health and human services into the defense budget. These are billions of dollars that are being moved as we speak. And it's not the first time. So the question becomes, how do we come together? Has this gone to the point that this is a national thing? Maybe not, because it's HIV. But with cancer, would people come together? Remember the whole thing that before the end of the Obama campaign, they wanted to have a special fund for cancer research? Right. So what is it that we're not doing? And you see and you can just say, Dr. C, that was really nice, let's move on, but.
Well, look how long it took them to say that and acknowledge cancer.
Yeah.
Right. That's true.
Well, I guess if you say that, they're gonna tell you where you have Ryan White, if you're looking for.
I mean, we had Ryan White, right?
Yeah, you're asking for national funding like cancer, and I'm being facetious
right.
on your point. They're probably gonna ask, for a long time, since we had Ryan White in 1990, it took up to 2010 for us to have a national strategy for HIV.
Right.
It took that long, and some of the things that I insist on, which she said she didn't want to make it a political discussion. Every decision that comes from the government that has to do with funding is a political decision. Those of us sitting in here, you have to go to your representatives. Those are the people that vote for the funding. You have to make sure that they include things like this in their campaign strategies, that this is what they want to do, that they know about HIV, that they're aware that it's a problem in the community. What are you going to do about it? Ask them. We have to confront them with questions like that.
I see a couple of hands, and I welcome all the other good souls that are helping us violate the fire ordinance.
It's actually Dr. Kavanaugh's class.
Right. Something like that, right?
I'm glad they're joining us.
Go ahead.
Having lived through the federal government through all of this and through many administrations, let me say that it's not the party that's the issue.
Yeah.
Once I've been in the federal government 20 years before I retired, so I went through several administrations and working in HIV for a lot of that time. It wasn't the party. It was the people that were in charge, which is not necessarily along party lines. And what I've seen through HIV now is it came to a point where they wanted more missiles and more things in the Department of Defense. And therefore, like you were saying, the budgets went down. However, what the breast cancer people did is they went to the Department of Defense and added missiles to mammograms, and they added other programs that were there. Now, a couple of presidents
Just saying.
started to talk about how we can get the more HIV funds into other departments, so it was supposed to be dispersed. And therefore there would be more money. Sometimes that happens, but then that got politicized with who people slept with.
Right.
So all I'm saying, and I agree with what you said, that as you're scrambling and having been on the funding side, not on the retired side, it was a matter of the powers that be, which are not necessarily the political powers, but the people that were telling the people that were coming to Washington, your senators that you send and your representatives that you send, and whoever was there, and how they were going to vote. And they never came back to their constituents until it was time to vote again. Mm-hmm. And if there was no pressure to vote a certain way, or there was no pressure to look at how things are funded, then they come back and they do what the people in power told them to do. So your role is very, very critical, especially in this next election coming in 2018. And then you have the opportunity now as people are running for various offices to find out where they stand, but don't just find out where they stand. Use the social media outlets that are available to point out where they stand, how they are for your community, how they're not working for your community.
I'm glad you brought that up. Before I get to the next couple of hands, I wanna hold on to the social media piece, because that was like a natural door opener when you talked about missiles to mammograms. How do we take advantage of social media to really push this funding issue? This is, what we're doing is organic. This is happening in real time. Or if you wanna pass, we'll come back.
I think, I think those of us that are here, we've shown an interest in this, and I think probably if you take a survey, a majority of people on here are on some form of social media. We have to take the same interest of advocating for HIV, like the people who do for cancer. We keep going back to the idea of stigma, because it is true. Facts are facts. You cannot run away from them. They'll chase you everywhere you go. We have to get to a point where people are comfortable getting on TV and saying, I'm fighting for HIV, without feeling like they have HIV. People are so afraid to be tied to it. People come to the clinic and they won't even carry any material that has HIV on top of it and walk out of the building. They're not gonna do that, but they'll do that for cancer. It's fun to see somebody, marching for cancer. But when you go to an HIV walk, you probably family members most of the time. So those of us who are interested, we have to get energized and do that. We can't wait for other people to do it.
Now, I saw like 2 or 3 hands. I'll go with the brother and when the right shirt and tie.
Well, I think one of the things that we could also do is to write on the dovetail of conditions that are related to HIV and that catches national attention or affects not just minority population, but affect white population. So if you look at the opioid epidemic and the impact it had in Indiana, it was a great way for us to slam in on that because it opened the doors to HIV infection in Indiana and go back to our policymakers and say, we're suffering the same problem here, HIV needs to be funded based on that. The second big thing that is now catching Washington's attention is hepatitis C. And risk factors are similar to HIV. Again, you dovetail with that, you stay in that conversation, you keep going with that. If you try to do on some people already believe, do we still have that problem? So you've got to remain in front and keep going. Each time someone says hepatitis C, hey, we're here. Each time talks about opioids, hey, it leads into this. And that's the only way you're going to get the conversation going.
One thing
Yes.
I wanted to say real quickly is, my issue is that everything has become a fad. It's a fad to help people with HIV for a little bit. It's a fad to help and work with poor people for a little bit. It makes you look good. And that's an issue I have because it gets the patients nowhere. It gets research nowhere, and it does nothing for our funding and for what we're trying to accomplish. And so for us, we have to, again, change that narrative because in their minds, in a lot of people's minds, it was a fad. HIV was bad during this time period, and a lot of that is, do we still have that problem? Oh, they have medications for that now. And again, it goes back to a generation of people who don't understand the effect of HIV in general. And so when you don't have that and you can't tie that to something, there is no weight. Hep C, they think, oh, that's my grandma. My grandma could have Hep C, she's a baby boomer. They think diabetes, oh, my brother, my mom, my dad, they all have diabetes. Cancer, that's affected them. But until it affects their house, until HIV hits their house, a lot of times that's not the topic of conversation.
Now, I'm gonna leave something out here for us to come back to that. And the question, deal with the word fad, becomes what is the long game? and hopefully before we finish, I'd like to come back to that. How do you move from fad to something that we are building into generations? Because that's a real push. So, okay, I saw two people in front of me, yes.
My quick thing is, my challenge to the audience and everyone that's speaking, is I'm looking around here, we have some great ideas. But I believe we need to talk about how do we do that. We have a group of young people here who are probably just as passionate and want to be able to do something to help, but may not know where to start. So I don't want us to assume that with these ideas that people know where to begin. But if we have suggestions on how to do some of these things, that may be helpful.
Well, just to follow with that, one of the issues about why we're here is not just to do this now, but to continue to do this in some form. Because, you know, I said to Nikki, one of my biases is I can't stand going to events where I feel good and then I go home and that's it. You know, that doesn't help this thing. So part of the issue is for us to really talk about continuing, whether it's electronically, what have you, in putting things in place for us to do that advocacy, to do the grassroots things, because it's not enough just to sit and talk. Talk is cheap.
Carmen has something.
Carmen.
Oh, I was gonna follow to the question a long time ago, but I see Dr. Junior had his hand up. And he's not my son, by the way.
Now you said dad, right?
To that point, we already defined it, and we kind of, he said to piggyback the discussion with HIV and Hep C, and you were saying how do you shift it out of it being a fad. And the only thing that I think about currently with the new incident rate of HIV among our aging population, we need to think about how do we get the material out there. Now, personally, I know at Charlotte with their public health, we tried to change the printed material from perspective from, we went from UNC Charlotte, modified the printed material for the Asian population, and then also looked at how we can mobilize it through the web. The thing is a generational gap. But within that sandwich, you have people going along that continuum, and everybody get old, and everybody love grandma. So when you piggyback that as a marketing campaign, you can't lose. The thing is, cross-pollination among all the agencies to get this idea out, to have this discussion. It shouldn't be just solely public health. It shouldn't be solely like schools or social work driving this discussion. Old people go to jail. Old people go to the hospital. Old people go to the homeless shelter. So all us, I mean, I'm only one guy. It was 3 people trying to get it done, but had that same conversation. We got D-Head right down the road. You know what I mean? So that's the next move.
So, okay, I'm sorry, no, I'll take a couple more responses and then move to the next question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, with the burden.
I was kind of going off of like what she was saying about like the way that a lot of social issues will come up with one like big thing, like something big will happen, majority pays attention to it, says something about it, shouts about it on Facebook, and then in a couple of weeks we forget about it and we move on. I think that like something that's been really evident is the way that a lot of groups have mobilized on social media. So like the Women's March movement was built out of social media based on whatever it was, and now they're doing policy, they're doing things in policy and making that movement like organically as well. Same with like Black Lives Matter, that was formed, and they're doing policy things as well. I think the main way that I've seen them focus on keeping things not just as a fad, but actually paying attention all the time, is being active in elections like this one, but also not just saying hurrah when they get the person that they want, but saying, okay, now that we have this person that supports policy, we need to keep them accountable, and we need to make sure that they're still supporting us, because once they're not, then we still need to be paying attention, and we still need to advocate for change. So I think that's really important, is like paying attention and holding them accountable. Like, now you're up there, but now you still have a job to do, you know?
It's
So,
really easy for us to say everybody vote, but if you're not making an informed decision, or if they feel like the work stops after the vote,
Right.
we're
Right.
getting nowhere.
Right,
We have to
exactly.
hold feet, we have to hold feet to the fire.
So last comment, and I'll transition to the next question.
Okay, for sure, thank you. So I think when it comes to how do we do the social media thing, how do we have this not be a fad, I think we have to balance the fads with things that have already been proven statistically to be constants. Like, for example, that ice bucket challenge thing was a fad, but it raised $1.3 billion. And then they were kind of able to grow from that. So there are a couple things like that. There's like, okay, we need to just ride this as much as we can, and then we're probably not going to be able to get an ice bucket challenge type of thing probably again for that particular organization. But then there's also the whole idea of, okay, Domestic Violence Awareness Month's coming up. What does that have to do with HIV? Or, you know, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, Teen Dating Awareness Month, all of those different things that people already kind of care about consistently every year. And then trying to figure out, like, National Stress Awareness Day is coming up, and there's some things related to that. And then, so plugging in on our social media, how does our issue connect to things that people already consistently pay attention to every year?
So I'm going to shift to the next question. In what ways can we keep the voice of the LGBTQIA community active in the struggle in the South? How do we keep that voice active? I heard a sidebar, just in the South. Well, it could be all around the world if you want. This is Carmen.
I'm sorry.
What were you trying to say?
The South, I guess we don't care about the rest of the island. But,
I'm trying to get me in trouble.
I'm sorry. I mean, again, I think that goes back to some of the same conversation we had about churches. It's about inclusion. It's about being inclusive, including their voice at the table and not separating out people. We're all in this together. We're all in this, whether we like it or not, we are all in this together. And I think that when we, there are populations with special needs, absolutely. Populations, there are cultures that we need to be competent in addressing. But I think that everyone needs to be at the table. There should be a separate table for people of color and a separate table for, this population or that population, where we're all trying to get to the same end. We're all trying to end the epidemic. That's the long game. We've got to end this epidemic. I've been working in HIV a long time. I'm tired. I need to retire soon. and I want to.
You were talking about handing it over, right?
I don't want to hand it over. I want to hand success over. I want to hand the end of the epidemic over. We got some other stuff we've got to focus on, and we need to end this epidemic. And to me, that's the end game. That's the end game.
That is the end game.
That is.
So you were answering the question about the end game.
Oh, I did, yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Sorry, I did it early. It was premature, sorry.
No, that's good.
I would say, for me, I definitely agree with Dr. Julius, and we had a conversation earlier today with Dr. Parker as well, where we spoke about a pet peeve that Dr. Parker and I shared, was that HIV is so much tied to MSM. PrEP is so much tied to MSM, and this is my little plug for PrEP. I think we have one later as well.
So I want to ask that question, but go ahead.
Okay.
No, keep going.
Is that out there?
No, I have a question about that.
Okay, we'll save it. We'll
No,
save
but
it.
go ahead, seriously.
But there's so much tied to that, and that's fine. We understand. That is okay. But our concern is if we're focusing on the end game, if we're focusing on the epidemic, and we're focusing on ending it, it affects more than MSM. HIV affects your minority women. It affects any woman. And a lot of times women feel like, I don't need to get tested. I don't want to know. They may feel like, I've been with the same man for this many years. There's no way he would cheat on me. Shocker.
Newsflash.
Every one of us has probably met a friend who slept around and hasn't gotten tested. And that is still tied to that stigma.
We don't know because we don't have that conversation.
We don't have those conversations.
Exactly. So
We
I
don't.
would piggyback on what Dr. Cameron said. For me, the most important thing is acceptance. We have to accept people for who they are. There was an election last night in New Jersey, and the lady who won was someone who the opponent had been rejecting for a long time, would not even talk to her because of who she says she is. You have to respect people. You have to accept them for who they are. I mean, many of you in here probably like dogs. I grew up in a culture where, dogs they don't sleep in the house with the owners, so we don't treat them the same way. It is true, for me those things, it is true, so we don't treat them the same way. So, but here, if you don't accept that, somebody tells you, I'm gay, or, I'm a female, but I think I really should be a male, and they're trying to change to who they are. We need to accept that. You don't have to do anything for them. They're not asking you to pay for their medication. Just accept that that's who they are. Don't judge them. If you cannot accept, you cannot educate them about some of the problems that they may face. And yes, men who have sex with men are at higher risk for contracting HIV. But if you cannot accept that that's who they are, you cannot even tell them that it's a risk factor. How are you going to start that conversation?
And you don't have to agree to educate.
Right.
You
I'm
don't
not
have
saying-
to.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying? You don't have to agree with that. If that's your personal belief, I can have my personal belief, but I can still provide you with education. Because at the end of the day, I care about you as a human being. And a lot of times, we lose that humanity portion. And that's what you have to remember. If you're in this field and you want to work with HIV, you're going to see every and any type of patient. In the clinic that we work in, we see your typical patient with, 2 kids, a dog, and a white picket fence, to our patient that lives in the woods in a wheelchair that has absolutely nothing. And you have to be consistent. You have to be that person that provides and gives that patient something that they can hold on to and something that they can succeed with. And if you allow how you personally feel to deter what you can provide to that person, you might need to find a new avenue.
And I think it's health,
Oh, no, you're good.
I think it's health and human services workers, that's part of our role. That's part of our role to stress and press for cultural competence from our healthcare providers, from our case managers, from our behavioral health specialists. Everyone needs to be culturally competent to deal with the population that we have, that allows us to serve them. Okay, and I think that is a specific role for many of us in this room as we move forward.
How about advertising?
Advertising?
When using people that look like all different aspects of humanity saying, I am HIV.
Right.
I remember that stuff was started with cancer and everything else. People had to see it to be something other than the other people. And I think that has to keep going before people. I remember going to one of the libraries being tested, because they'll have like free testing spots. I was the only person sitting in there, and I saw all these people going by going, should I?
Right.
Should I not? Because if you go in, and then I remember sitting there feeling like, they probably think I'm awesome.
Right.
And so we have to do something about that. Everything else, I think, comes after that. Because until people can see themselves, kind of like with the opioid situation as well. Because until people could see themselves as drug abusers in prison for it, they didn't care. So we do have to get all of the faces, and I think we do something that's showing all the faces. And it doesn't even have to be that you are. It's just showing the faces. Because from every given moment, we don't know.
Right.
I remember at least back in, when it became awareness, it was like, well, it can live in your body for 10 years before you know. Now, I don't know if that's still the same. That was the first message that came out 30, 40 years
2
ago.
weeks, you find out now.
So you gotta find out. You gotta find out. You don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think people are just kind of afraid of saying, yeah, it's me, because everyone attaches stigma to it. So I think advertisement to do that we just get faces out there, whether on posters, somewhere, everywhere, that people see it's everyone, and not just those people.
Now, I saw a couple of hands behind the first row. Make sure before I move on to say, yes. Let me pause for a second. I noticed that I don't see, this is the teacher in me, right? I see some hands, but then there's a lot of hands I don't see. So the persons who have not had a chance to speak before, do you want to chime in before I take the two up from here? Yeah, because I pretend. Yes, sir.
Well, I hear a lot of talk about stigma, but I think everybody carries something that they feel stigmatized about. And so what we need to do is look at, why don't we talk about what it is we're hiding?
Because of stigma.
Right, but there's more to it.
Yeah.
The stigma is not, oh, people won't like me, it's what I will lose. And we need to address those things. Your job is on the line. Excuse me. Your housing is on the line. Your relationships are on the line. We need to talk about how do we help people protect those things. Then stigma doesn't matter. You know, I don't care necessarily that you don't like me. I do care if I think you're going to go back and share that with something that's going to affect me. And we need to really address those kinds of issues.
Thank you. So we'll take 3 hands, one a few rows back, and then we'll come up. Yes, yes.
Oh, sweet. So kind of going off what you were saying and then trailing back to like how do we advocate for LGBTQIA folks in the South, one of the things that I think is extra disheartening and it causes people to stay silent is that there is a lot of bigotry and infighting within the queer community. Like, we got a very big G specifically for white cisgender gay men who are like real fit and pretty. And then there's really not a lot of room for everybody else. Like, if you don't look cute on like a chicken soup ad, like, people don't really talk to you. And so I think that's something, especially with like trans folks, those who are HIV positive, folks of color, is that because they see that discrimination within the community that's supposedly progressive and great, I mean, why should they be open and honest about what's going on in their lives?
Last comment. And then, yes.
So I kind of have a question for you guys who have done a lot of the work and a lot of the research and all of this. When it comes to educating especially in the South, so I come from a very conservative family, and so I hear a lot of like the deep-rooted like bigotry that you don't think still exists out there, but like that very, very like strongly people will say, and so it's like, so a lot of times I don't really know how to respond in a way that is going to like properly advocate for the right communities. So a lot of times I have heard people blame the LGBT community for the existence of HIV. And so not necessarily that they don't want to help people with HIV, but that they use that as a reason to oppress certain communities. And I'm not really sure quite how to address that, but I see it. And I think that has a really big place in how this issue ends up getting erased.
I'm smiling because my next question tags onto that, so I'm going to wait for the panel to speak, and then I'm going to kind of add a comment and push them just a tad bit more. You want me? I'll just say, how do we get?
I'm sitting here, nothing scares me if it's within the realm of the law.
Now you have your picture, right? Yeah, you put it on social media.
I traveled a long way to come here. It's not going to scare me. Now, I've been a long way from Africa, not from Charlotte.
we can get you overseas non-stop over here.
So she said something about stigmas, which was very moving. It was palpable.
Yeah.
Everybody felt it, everybody was on their nerves. And then what she said kind of tied in with that. And I'd like to add that, the Civil Act of 1964, it did not solve all the problems. There was nothing before that. But we feel satisfied that we've gotten some of the basic rights to vote and to do other things. LGBT teams are still asking for those civil rights, all right? We need to push for those rights. We need to. People are still suffer. People are still fired from their jobs because they're gay. They walk a certain way. They talk a certain way. A lot of them don't have protection. People have difficulties having insurance life insurance because of who they are. Those are some of the things that we need to push for the law to change. The only protections you really get from maybe somebody going out and saying anything about you is in healthcare because of HIPAA. You know, I cannot go out there, or she cannot go out there and say, oh, he has HIV. She'll get in trouble, you know, but other than that, people can do other things in the social environment, which there's really no law regulating that, you know, besides taking them to court and suing them for libel. There's really no consequence for that. So we need to push for other regulations, laws that can punish people for things that they do or discriminate against people that's outside of work or outside of the healthcare system. People need to get comfortable with who they are. I would not blame somebody for not coming out and saying that I'm gay. All right, it's not their fault. It's my fault for looking at them differently. It's my fault for making them afraid. We need to make people feel comfortable, and they will say, don't come out.
And I think that those of us who stand by silently are just as guilty, and just as culpable as those who make those remarks or who stigmatize other people. So back to your question, the lady in the red scarf, I don't know if that's your family or friends or your community. You would probably know the best way to approach, but you know, that's an education issue. That's an issue of education. And please believe that whatever group of folk you're talking about are not the only people who are ignorant of you know, cultural competence and what HIV is and is not, and about the facts about living with HIV and all those kinds of things. We are afraid. We are afraid. And fear causes us to respond in some really strange ways. We don't understand HIV. You know, we're not educated. We don't understand it. We don't know where it's coming from. We don't know what you know, we got a whole lot of issues, and fear causes us to respond in strange ways. I think that the only cure for fear is education, and that's for anything. When women are assaulted, often they don't report that because of stigma. Stigma affects us in a lot of different ways. It's the fear of what people will think, what people will say, again, what we will lose, what we stand to lose, and also it's the fear of what it will mean for our loved ones. It's a fear, it's our fence. Fear becomes our fence, okay? And so does ignorance of facts. That becomes your fence. And so we have to help people to break down those fences by educating them about facts. There's so many myths and misconceptions about HIV. It is unbelievable that in 2017, we got a call that someone said, oh, my friend was smoking and I found out they had HIV and I want to know if I'm going to get it because they were blowing cigarette smoke in the air. Yes. And you know, I see smiles and head shaking, but people still in 2017 have those kinds of beliefs. We have work to do.
What do we do to even protect people's lives?
I'm sorry.
Because I've noticed here in the South, I mean, there are some communities that if you share some information, you can have people in the community who will attack you.
Right.
Kill you.
And that goes back to what you were saying. You know, we need to have some protections in place.
Well, just so that you, out of transparency, I'm actually going to say what the question is that has me and my sister over here on the same page. We posed the question as a group: how do we get past or address Southern provincialism?
Yeah.
Now, just to kind of push that a little further, think of it this way: the South is the diabetes, the heart disease, the stroke, and the HIV belt. Why is it that we're harping on all the states in the South having differential disparities compared to the rest of the nation? There's something about the South. And the question becomes, what is the strengths of the South and what are the barriers? I'm going to push the strengths out for a moment and say, how do we get past whatever the barriers are? Yes.
I don't know that this is a strength, but I'm going to point this out. How many of you have family reunions? Christmas parties, Thanksgiving get-togethers with your family. How many of you have that aunt who has diabetes, but she says, baby, go cut me another piece of pie? She said, I'm just going to take a little extra pill tomorrow. But we're not afraid over this pie, right? But we're going to eat it, correct? Because we in the South know that we believe that God is gonna take care of everything, that it's already written in the book, so this extra piece of pie is not gonna hurt me, I'm just gonna eat it, right? Don't we do that? Don't we do that? We know the facts, we know
Let's
the
call
facts.
it what it is.
Let's call it what it is. Uncle Joe and all the uncles and nephews are out back there drinking and smoking, right? They're having those cigars, right? But, we know that what cancer makes your lungs look like, what nicotine makes your lungs look like, right? But, we're celebrating around these kinds of things, and we just know, it's fate. You gotta die from something. How many of you heard that? You gotta die from something. We've got to get behind those kinds of cultural beliefs. Those are our barriers, those cultural beliefs that we've repeated over generations. Everybody in the family could finish that sentence. You gotta die from, everybody in the family knows something, So, those are the kinds of things we're fighting against. It's ingrained in our Southern culture. And I'm a adopted Southerner. I'm from the Midwest, but we do the same thing in the Midwest.
Something that I found about the South, and I'm Southern born and bred, is that going back, it's about Southern class. We don't really hear about it too much now, but that class has come forward. And what I mean by that is if it's inappropriate, we don't talk about it.
Right.
Yep.
Okay? A true lady never talks. A good girl doesn't talk about it. So we don't want to talk about sex. We don't want to talk about diabetes. We don't want to talk about the G word or we don't want to talk about these topics. And we have somewhere in our history convinced ourselves that if we don't talk about it, they don't exist.
That's right.
And that's the problem. If we don't have these conversations, you can't provide that education. If we don't have these conversations and it's not normal to go get tested, and it's not normal for me to ask you, have you been tested before I lay down with you, then that's a problem. If you get offended that someone asks you when's the last time you've been tested, there's a problem. And that's what has happened across the South. And it's something that Southerners will say, and if you're from the North, you've probably heard a Southerner say this to you. You all just say whatever comes to your mouth. That's right. And Lord help if you're from New York. You know they just say, oh, y'all New Yorkers.
That's why I can ask this question.
New Yorkers just say everything.
That was news. That was old news, right?
But it is, and we laugh because we know it's true.
But it's true.
It is true.
Absolutely.
And it's it's something with culture.
And the reason why we ask that question is that the solution in the South is embedded within that cultural context.
Absolutely.
That I would not, as a New Yorker, propose to do something in Columbia, South Carolina, based upon cultures that are in South Carolina. The same thing in Abuja, Nigeria, to do the same thing in Atlanta. Because it has to be framed within that context. You see, that's why we're pushing on those things. Yes?
I'm gonna be pushing maybe a different way.
Uh,
It goes back to history, okay? So when we start talking about what we don't talk about, goes back to the time when slavery was here in the South, okay? And how these norms, in my opinion, have been passed down in terms of that you don't say anything. And we haven't necessarily, as a people, perhaps, healed from that. Okay, so there's a reason why we are where we are today. So being able to kind of understand that and heal from that, because we still have parents, grandparents. My grandmother was 92 when she passed away. Okay, who's lived through a lot of this oppression. And sometimes being able to survive was to be able to deny that it existed. That's right. So someone could keep functioning. So when I hear you say that, I totally get that. But from a behavior standpoint, why do we do that? Because sometimes it's a part of a survival mechanism.
I agree.
And it is a chain, what my grandma would say, that we would have to break.
I agree.
And how do we begin to break that?
I agree 100% because that could be a number of things. How many have heard what goes on in the house stays in the house?
Everybody can finish that sentence.
Everyone can finish that. Whether it's you're the wife, whether it was your ancestor and she was the wife of a slave owner, whether you know that your husband is having affairs with a certain slave, but in order to keep your position, you won't say anything. You don't want to be disowned. What if you didn't have slaves? What if you just are a rich family? And what if your husband has many mistresses? For you to say something means you lose everything that you have. You lose your children. You lose your money. So what we built on culture and what we have turned into a pride, Southern pride, there's nothing prideful about ignorance. There's nothing prideful about not being able to get help because you won't open your mouth. But for us, it's become the norm.
How do you change that?
I see 3 hands.
This young woman in orange.
4, 5, 75. No. Hot shot, John. We done hit pay dirt. Yes.
I'm also from the north, so moving down here for school to the south was pretty much a culture shock for me. And when you said what the strengths are of the south, I think the first thing that came to my mind, which can double as a weakness as well, and is predominantly a weakness right now, is Southerners are some of the most stubborn people that I've ever met in my life. And when they think something, they think it through and through, and they are hard in their ways and they are set. So I guess that's the weakness right now, but it could be turned into a strength, and that's where the education and the awareness comes into play. But I guess the question is just, how do we intervene in that? What generation ends the set in the ways streak, I guess?
I'm going to give the Zen answer. You've answered. A strength is a weakness and vice versa.
This young woman in the gold sweater had her hand up for.
Oh, what I can't see. Thank you, Dr. Boo.
She's had her.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go off of what you were saying. I think that this whole idea of people recognizing Southern culture and then saying our culture has strengths and weaknesses and we need to overcome the weaknesses in order to be more educated is nice. But does that drive people? What drives people a lot of times is being angry or upset or seeing something that personally affects them. And it's not just that diabetes and the rate of heart disease and HIV here in the South is happening. It's that people are profiting off of those things occurring. And there's an entire system that creates that. So we need to get people angry about the fact that it's not that ignorance is perpetuated as some sort of fun Southern culture and idea. It's that it's perpetuated so through and through that people truly don't know. So they're not even realizing that them saying I'm eating that extra piece of pie is actually benefiting the guy who owns Albertsons, who makes that piece of pie and makes money that you bought that piece of pie and ate the extra piece of pie, because now you're going to have diabetes and be in the hospital that he also owns. And it's that link and showing people that people are trying to have these things hurt you.
Yes.
So based on what you were saying on the Southern culture, I'm also from the North, and something that I've seen is how big faith is embedded in the Southern culture. And going back to talking about how, you can't talk about these exact topics that you're talking about, that can't happen in the South, but a lot of it is because faith is so much bigger down here, and it is embedded in the culture so much more that up north, that was a big difference. And it's not necessarily a weakness down here, but it does have to start with talking to those clergy and pastors.
I agree. I kind of like to piggyback off of that because there are a lot of churches here in the South. I'm from Ohio, recently transplanted, and there are churches everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and call that a strength of the South, and that a lot of the work that could be done probably could come through the church. And I also see a lot of Christian churches, and so if we're talking about Christian churches, these are churches that probably believe in Jesus as the Son of God, and who did Jesus hang out with, right? Like, not people that were, you know, like,
The downcast.
the outcasts. So I think,
So 2 more questions, and then we'll move forward to the last 2 questions out of the panel, and then we'll just kind of like go crazy, see what happens next. So, in the front, yes. Well, hold that and come back. Yes.
So I'm, half of my life, I was born in the South, and I moved to, my husband was in the military, and then we ended up in DC, so I was there for like a big half of my life, my work life. But when I came home, the one thing that I found out is there was a lot of things going on in family here. And there was a lot of things, I learned how to hush my mouth, because I was told in a meeting one time, girl, you've been gone too long, you don't know how to say things. So I'm learning now how to say things. But the one thing that that's worked for my family is I've gotten everybody to do a family health history. Through the health history, we found out about diabetes, cardiovascular disease, prostate cancer, the intergenerational incest, domestic violence, asthma, cancer within the family, and HIV. But it took the family unit. So I don't know if any of you have ever done your family history. I ran into a lot of stuff. Don't be telling my business, Francis. I know you just got here, and I know you're a nurse and you're always doing stuff, but don't be telling my business. I did anyway, and I posted it on our family page about who had what. But what it did was brought the family together to now start thinking about Troy, who had HIV. How did he get HIV? Who was he messing with when he got HIV, how many travels he did, even though he was doing wonderful work and everybody was hush, 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 you think Troy's gay and he got HIV. But once it was out within the family, when he died, was able to come together and to proudly wear red ribbons at his funeral, including my mama, who is very, very conservative. But the whole idea about coming together within something that was within my sphere of influence, my family. And the Surgeon General did do a thing on that about doing your family history. You can go to the Surgeon General's webpage if the other administration hadn't taken it down. It's just a bit, but you can do it anyway. And then find out what's your family history and talk within your family. And then from that sphere, somebody did a model. Y'all in school, so y'all remember that when you do your family model, then you do your community, then you do somebody else, your neighborhood, and so on. And that's how, I think that's the change model, change behavioral model. And that was just one that I used. So I'm just offering that up as one thing.
And that's important because family is important in the South.
Yes.
And that's a strength. Family is important. And that's
And going off of Dr. Carmen, I was going to say that because family is so important, it starts with us. When you hear those comments, back to what you were saying, it starts with us to address it right then. It's like any other issue that we're hush-hush about. If you never say anything and you never call anyone out, they're going to feel, oh, I can say this in front of this person and they're okay with it. Your silence doesn't mean acceptance, but to someone else, it does. And so until we call people out on what they say about HIV, what they say about any of these things that we've talked about tonight, we can't really make that, we can't later come out on social media and say, I support when you sat, around your dinner table, your Thanksgiving table with your family and heard them make all those comments and said nothing. It starts with us.
So we have a little United Nations here trying to translate something I couldn't hear. So my translator is going to give it to you, to my brother.
Well, just a quick comment about the strength of the South and the weaknesses of the South. I've been down here for 10 years. Well, I'll say 14 because I lived 4 years in Florida. One of the first things that I noticed coming down here was the idea of Southern hospitality. It does exist until you live long enough to start booking caviar and seeing that the holes here and there. One of my first experiences when I got here, the very next day I went for an oil change And then I met a guy waiting for election to be completed on his car. And he greeted me, asked me where I came from. And I said, I came from Delaware. And he said, have you found a church? That was my second day. You know, I don't find a church where I'm going to go. Now, the word conservative is used to describe people in the South. And that's good, because I also come from a conservative culture. That means, for the most part, they're set in their own ways. They believe in themselves. They are proud of the original ideas on which they believe, and it's good. But the bad part about that is societies that do not respond to change do not make progress. That's why we're not making progress on women's rights. You know, there's the idea that you have to know where you belong here. You know, women cannot make progress. There's certain things that girls don't do, and there's certain things that men are expected to do. And it has to change. So for me, that's the weakness, the idea that you believe something and you are unwilling to move from there. We have to be able to shift around. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to, it came to you, the vision has come to you.
I didn't know how I wanted to say it, and I'm too learning how to shape my words and not northern just come at you.
Blast everything?
One of the things in talking about the strengths of the church here is that almost like when we're talking about the different communities of the organizations that work with individuals who are living with HIV, everybody got their little pot and nobody wants to work together. Well, that's why we have so many churches. It's all these people not working together who have their little beliefs. So even though it might appear as a strength, it actually ends up turning as a weakness. And I remember from my classrooms and teaching here that the majority of my students in my classroom that were from the South were either atheists or agnostic. And they gave the tale that of things that happened, and they saw how people in their church or families or friends who said they believed in God treated them, and they said, if that's a God that we serve, I want nothing to do with it. So we're losing a lot of people because of those beliefs that seems like it's a strength, but we're losing our young people. When I have a class of 50 and 40 are saying, I don't believe in God, and they were standing in line to tell their stories why, that's not a strength.
So one more comment, then I will transition to the last two questions of the panel. And while I'm up here, I believe that some of you have received something that looks like a survey. Be an artist and express yourself and touch those pieces of paper and make them your friends. So the gentleman in the middle, and then I'll ask the panel the last two questions.
The other thing I just wanted to piggyback to what you mentioned about going back to the church. I really want to be careful about saying the church is a strength, because even within the church, there's a class system. And it's very strong. There's a class system in terms of there's a church that will produce the governor and the people who are in government, and you're not there. And then there's a church that has no say in what happens. So when we say church, there are different layers of church, and the differences, the discriminations, so on, they continue. They're blessed by the church. So yes, there's a church, but there's a class control in the church.
So I want to manage our time. One of the questions is about prep, but the other one I want to make sure we ask is what do we do next? So I don't want to spend 25 minutes on something and then people say, whoa, what are we going to do next? And I spent 2 minutes on it. So I'm gonna take executive privilege and just move forward because I want to spend a lot of time on what do we do next. So the second to last question is is there a disparity regarding prescribing pre-exposure, prophylaxis, PrEP, and post-exposure in the southern states? And if it's so, what's going on with that?
Definitely. In short, definitely. As a pharmacist, I see a lot when it comes to PrEP, and there's a lot of education on this.
Define that just in case everybody knows what PrEP is.
Okay, so PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis, and in a nutshell, what happens is if a patient is eligible, a negative patient that is not currently living with HIV, that patient can receive it's right now one medication that they can take every day to prevent them from developing, because we're trying to stay away from contracting, that could prevent them from developing HIV if they're living a lifestyle that could put them at risk of HIV. Does that make sense? So essentially, the first thing that comes to people's minds when they hear PrEP is MSM. Okay? But there's an entire population of patients that are eligible for PrEP and eligible for this medication that people are not touching, we're not tapping into. And we have to do education with the providers, because we'll have doctors or nurse practitioners or physician assistants who are like, I don't want to do that. And their first thing may be, oh, well, if I give them this, it's going to increase their risk of an STD or STI. If we take it to the community, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the fact that they could be at risk of HIV. And so there is a great disparity, and there's a need for education on what it is and why it's important. Because what about our minority women? What about women who, like I said earlier, who have been in those relationships? Okay? What about those women who may be prostitutes, who may be dancers? What about those women who have, entered into these relationships, or they have multiple partners and have never stopped to ask, what is your status? All of those are things that have to be considered, and a lot of times they aren't.
Could you also share what's post-exposure prophylaxis as well?
Okay.
Yeah, the post, and then I saw a hand, almost near the back. So just a second here.
Okay, so post-exposure prophylaxis is essentially treatment. It's after an event has happened that you're concerned you could have developed HIV from. So having unprotected sex with someone and you don't know their status. The condom broke, you're not sure. You're thinking, or you find out that you've had sex with this person and they do have HIV, and it's right after. It has to be started within 72 hours, but right after.
Right, and for those of you who are in healthcare, if you stick your finger with a needle or someone who has HIV, or you don't know their status, and that's what that is for. With regard to PrEP, the big issue which you said, which I totally agree, it's like we said before, we work in the same place, so we work very closely together. Education,
Yes.
is huge. People don't know what it is, and CW Williams is making a big push. We have flyers, we have cards. We have some of them here today, so we're gonna put them on the desk when we leave, so people can pick them up. And I encourage you to go online. Everybody, or most people, have a smartphone. Look it up, talk to your family members about it, talk to your classmates, talk to the people in the community about it. I had a patient who came in the other day. I said, oh, I heard about PrEP, I don't know what it is. But it's somebody that has a partner that's HIV positive, and he had no idea, So it's something that we need to encourage people to do. It's not just for MSN. It's for people who are IV drug users. It's for people who have any kind of activity that increases your risk of contracting HIV. You don't have to be in mind having sex with a man. If you're a woman, having sex with a man, or you're a prostitute, you have multiple partners. It's important that you talk to your doctor about it. It doesn't mean you're going to get it right away.
And so,
I'm going to lean on this Dr. OB because I acknowledge the lady back there. You want to talk over him?
And it's free. Just
that's you,
You
Nikki.
want to add?
That's you, Nikki.
Come on.
You go first.
No, girl,
See,
go.
see,
Cause you do your thing.
Oh, regular. We got a love fest. See, now, I got played. I got played. I'm just saying.
Well, I'm a PrEP program coordinator,
Yes.
and I just kind of want to piggyback on what the two providers up there said. I have seen a lot of clients that call me for PrEP and PEP. They've been to the ER or doctor's care or their primary care doctor who didn't know what PrEP was, didn't know what PEP was, prescribed them the wrong medication, they scrambling at the last minute but then when we hold forums like this to educate the providers on PrEP, they don't want to come. Nobody wants to come. So it's very frustrating for me because I'm like, you have to leave your personal feelings outside the door. If you're a provider, to the O, you need to leave your personal feelings out the door. So I think a lot of that goes back to their own comfort level with taking an appropriate sexual health history, you know, because a lot of providers won't do it. A lot of primary care doctors won't do it. It also comes to them having the cultural competence to deal with these clients that have, I'll say alternative types of sex. I'll say it like that. But it all across the board with HIV treatment, HIV awareness, HIV prevention, it goes back to education. Education is the key.
So I'm gonna mess with you here, because you said, you mentioned a comment that's really on point about providers. You gotta feed them and pay them money. Could you talk about that too?
And
Educate the audience, because that is a real
That's
issue.
real talk. If you're having a $100 plate dinner at Ruth Chris, they'll show up. They'll show up. You know, if you are giving them the trip to Santa Monica for a one-day workshop and they get a $1,500 honorarium, they will show up. I'm a community-based organization. We don't have those kinds of funds. But let me just say one thing about a disparity that I think we have to be aware of, and that is there is an industry. There's a sex industry. Did you know that? We have people who work in the sex industry who may be appropriate for PrEP, and we have to make sure that we are educating them and providers who care for them when they are there, which are often, again, the community-based organizations. That's kind of a hidden profession. We have people who don't necessarily come and fill out their application, or fill out their enrollment form and under, you know, where you work, they don't say the corner of whatever, or they don't say that their profession is professional sex worker. But we have to be aware that there's a population of folk who we are overlooking who can definitely benefit from PrEP. They may not have that one partner who is HIV positive, but certainly they come in contact with folk that they may not know their status.
Now, I know I kind of went around Robinson's barn and ignored you for a minute.
You did.
See, I said, I acknowledge that as a social worker. Did you get a chance to respond to something from earlier, or did you?
Maybe, I don't remember now, so.
It'll come back to you, and I'm just
2 or
gonna
3
get out the
days,
way,
I'll
right?
remember, yeah.
You'll call up and shout down the phone, hey, okay.
That's right.
So I wanted to emphasize.
Oh, so I see a hand, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to emphasize, so if you know anybody who is at risk, you know, PrEP is free, right? You don't have to have insurance. If you go to a provider, the drug companies provide the medication free.
Could
So you
you,
gotta remember that free is important.
could you just one more time go over the risk factors?
Yeah.
So that we are clear about them?
So anybody who participates in any activity that's gonna expose you to HIV, if you are a sex worker, if you are an IV drug user, if you are a man having sex with another man, if you are in a relationship with someone who is HIV positive and you are HIV negative, those are some of the 5 basic categories in which you want to have a conversation about PrEP. You have to be HIV negative in order to start it. You cannot take PrEP if you are HIV positive. It will not work.
Now I saw 2 hands, one almost by the door, and then the other lady in front. Yes.
So one of the things, just for the benefit of my students in the class, and maybe that I think is helpful, is Quint Studer says, what we permit, we promote. So I try to share that with my students as far as keeping quiet or becoming educated. And I was, a couple of things. One, at the beginning when we came in, you were talking about social media, and it might be helpful if you had a handout or 5 facts. This particular cohort, this particular generation lives in a media moment. So their ability to share what it is they know and articulate that in a way that is helpful, even in a culture that doesn't want to talk about things, is a way. Just 5 facts. You know, this is what you need to know. Not necessarily myth busters, but these are things that are okay for beginners to talk about. If there's some sort of advanced class where You have individuals who come and train on how to communicate messages and facts and resources and interventions. Maybe they get a certificate, something to talk about as far as, being advocates for AIDS or HIV awareness. And then talking about, for students, normalizing, in social work we don't like that word so much, but what we've normalized is it's okay to be diabetic because there's a pill. It's okay for things to happen because there's some sort of intervention, and we need to move beyond that's a secondary intervention. What we want is primary intervention, and that comes with what you shared about education, and it also comes with releasing permission to not make that normal anymore. Because even if the movement is a fad, HIV is not a fad. And that's what we need to kind of reinforce. This is not something that's going to go away today. So it's not a movement towards a fad, but if we think about it as an incremental intervention, this is what we do first. Everybody has 5 facts. Then everybody gets tested. This is where you get tested for free. And maybe you post it on Facebook and say, I've been educated, I've been tested, and I shared it with 5 friends. And then you target communities like USC or the colleges you come from. Let's get 100% or 99% awareness, where everybody knows 5 facts, they've all been tested, and they've shared it with 5 people. Let's see if we can move it that way. So for my class, you don't have to think in big scopes. Sometimes it's how can you address your classroom? How can you address your cohort? How can you address your sorority, your fraternity, to get them to normalize that it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to educate these people. It's okay to be affiliated or associated with a disease that's not necessarily an identity for you to say, I have compassion and I have empathy for this and I want to help. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So last comment before we transition to what's next. So
I'm not sure if anyone mentioned this or not. What are you all doing with linking the HIV/AIDS prevention efforts and awareness messages with trauma, sexual violence, domestic violence? Everything you're talking about with the PrEP has to do with choice to some degree. I heard when you mentioned about being a sex worker, but many people who are sex workers are not there because they want to be. And they don't have a lot of, I'm just going to go over here and get tested. That is not under their control. How are you all thinking of addressing those issues? The children, the wives, the male partners, the sex workers that are choosing those professions.
Okay, I work at a community-based organization here in Columbia, it's called CATS. We have, for the last several years, supported an organization, without funding, supported an organization called the Women's Health Council Project. And that project has evolved over the years. Originally, way back, 10 years ago, much longer ago than that, it was basically to focus on encouraging women to learn about HIV and spreading factual information about HIV in the community so that we can help fight some of the myths and misconceptions. Again, based on the fact that in many communities, women are the literal head of the household. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a single head of household. The women are the ones that often are the nurturers, the caretakers, the ones who focus on the health of the family. Anyway, over the years, we began to focus on some other things. We found that we had women who were newly released from incarceration, women who were in recovery, and sometimes in active substance use. So we, over the years, we found that our population was more complex than we had originally focused on. And so we found about 4 years ago that we needed to do some focus on do some work with trauma-focused care. We worked to ensure that our staff was well-trained. We received some training through the local alcohol drug abuse council, and ensured that our case managers and our linkage to care coordinator and the folks who were really doing some of the direct services were trained in trauma-focused care. There was also a professor from Duke University whose name escapes me, who did some work, came down and interviewed some of our women, and actually wrote a book called You Are the First Person I Told. And that book kind of focused on the fact that in the history of many women with HIV, there was some trauma. Trauma is more common than we think. We all have some kind of trauma. But there was some trauma of sexual abuse, and maybe at an early age, incest, rape, those kinds of things. And she kind of found that theme running through the stories of many of the women that she interviewed. And again, our focus had to become, how do we help our women heal? These are women that we want to be ambassadors in the community. We want these women to go out and they perform speaking engagements. They encourage other women to come in and get tested. They encourage other women to be linked to care. But they have to be healthy and whole in order to be able to be their best selves. And so we realized that we had to begin to do some work with them. And we, I cannot say we've had 100% success. We've lost some women. Some women have returned to prison. Some women have returned to abusive relationships. We have had some women who needed care beyond what we were treatment beyond what we were able to provide. But at least we were able to identify that. And so I'm really proud of the work we've done with that Women's Health Council project. They are a small group of women, and if in that small group of women we're finding that level of trauma, it's amazing to think what level of trauma there is community-wide. And so there's a lot of work to be done.
So one last comment, then we have to go to what's next.
20 seconds or less. We have not used the C word, condom use. So when you're taking PrEP, you should do also
You
use
still
that.
have to use condom. You still have to use condom. You still have to use protection. You still have to use, and those are one of the words that are seldom used in our patois at the beginning of the conversation. In the churches and faith-based organizations, where they don't want to talk about it. You have like the Catholic Church, they don't support that. So that's a very difficult conversation. But yes, for those of you who are here, tell your friends, tell your family members, put it on Facebook. If you're using PrEP, you still have to use the condom. You still have to use other means of protection. And birth control is not one of them.
And if they have questions, call the organization. There are people there that can answer the questions about PrEP and all of those kinds of things.
The information is everywhere. If you can access internet, I know it seems ubiquitous, but not everybody has it. But if you can go to a public library, just get on the internet, you'll be able to find places where they provide PrEP. In the state of North Carolina, DHS has a map of all the locations in the state where you can get PrEP, where you can walk in and be tested for HIV and be provided medication if you want to. It's online. Just go to DHS and you can find that information. With your zip code, it will tell you where those places are, right there in your community.
So the next question becomes a free-for-all, and it's a combined question. So I'm gonna start with the panel, and then we have like 50 people who can answer this too, right? So part of it asks, what are the roles, what should the roles for social workers, persons in the community, public health, and so on, in addressing the crisis in the South? And then the other piece is, what are the next steps? Whether it is collaboration, electronic communication, whether it's advocacy, grant proposals, research, what do we need to do from this point? Like, what should we do next? Do we need to meet next week? Do we need to do something? Oh, the way in the back, somebody already wanted to answer the question. Well, thank you, sister.
No problem. I can only think about being a USC student and being a social work major, how just in social work collaborating or just being a part of USC can make a difference. For one, I didn't know about PAPS, but saying like I'm one individual person but I'm also a social work major, and how just me as one individual person can make a difference by going to USC and my friends educating them. I have the luxury of having open discussions with my friends. I have the luxury of social media and already being an advocate in my personal community. And I have it's just certain links. So I can only think about when you say collaborating and just collaborating with USC in general. We have a department that's media driven. To have a whole campaign where USC is together. You know, even if we just have a week of awareness, a week of we're gonna create social media platforms. We have a program that knows how to make apps. It's things that we can do that will help us learn and help us get our degree, but at the same time, be cost friendly to you, because I can only think about how much I learned in an internship, how much I learned about advocating, or developing a program. So I could only think about collaborating with USC in each major that we have to gain awareness and to also reach different communities or different age groups. Like, I'm from the South, and I feel like my grandma is not receptive to change. My mom is more so, she has to be educated to change. I have to sit her down and have talks like, these things are new. It's going to be okay. We have to talk about these things. Versus me, you can tell me once and I get it. I'm more open. So I see the difference of where we have to hold certain people accountable and realize that although we're in the South, we still have to move forward. And it might just start with my generation, and that's fine, and that's okay. But I think right now, if we collaborate with USC just in Columbia, would make a big difference.
Thank you. I saw a hand on this side.
Yeah, I just think we missed a really big strength of the South, which is sports. Have we ever thought of even just having a little red ribbon on a helmet? I think that can start a conversation among a whole wide range of people.
Great.
I wanted to add something to what she said and what you said. And thank you for saying that, because yeah, we really did miss that. Sports is huge. Being a student here, maybe I missed it. I went on the website. I really didn't see any, and I apologize if I missed it. I didn't see anything on the website that specifically talks about HIV or gives statistics about HIV in the community on the student website. A couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting in Charlotte because the rates of syphilis are going up so high in Charlotte, and we're trying to discuss ways to target colleges. And I have to tell you that some of the colleges in the South, a lot of them are notoriously tough to break through when you have to talk about difficult subjects like this. And some of these things are still difficult for parents to talk to their kids about at home. I feel that colleges are some of the places where these conversations can take place, where kids who are the same age, they can come into a room like this and talk about it. Colleges have to take, I want you guys to look at your school policy, look at anything you can do. It has to be on your website. If it's not there, let the school put it up on there and put places where people can go for information. Not just say, oh, there's a clinic, go talk to the nurse at the clinic. That's not enough, So you guys need to look into that. That's where we could go. This is some of the progress we can make. Have information on your school website where you guys can find information like that and statistics on what's going on in your community. Yeah.
I never thought of it as that brings a lot of thought process to me, as in for an organization having to contact a dean or someone that's over our entire school. Because I think of like College of Social Work, how we're so open and we would love to meet you. We would love, like, my whole cohort would love this. Would love to say, let's do something about it. I promise you each person in this class is like, okay, what do we do next? Like, we're here. So it's interesting to say we don't have that on the website. And I bet you all of us is like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fix it? So I wonder if collaborating with social work majors, maybe partnering up where, like, we have to do internships, we have to do 250 hours, getting like one of us as an intern, because we have to talk to each other about our internships. We make post boards, we make awareness within our cohort. So maybe it has to start from us being a part of your organization and spreading awareness there. It's kind of like finding the loopholes within that university. Like, if that university is like, we can't be that open, or we don't feel okay making that next step, then taking that loophole of, okay, let's just find the social work, the School of Social Work. Let's sit down with the people over School of Social Work and let's see if we can move forward with them. But
So I really, again, I believe in giving credit where credit is due. Dr. Levkoff and our organization have worked together a number of years. Dr. Whitman has come forth, many folk in the School of Social Work. We work a lot with the School of Public Health, and we do have some collaborative projects we've either worked on in the past or are working on now. I think what the missing piece is that the students need to know there are opportunities for you to learn. If you don't have to come to PALS, you have the Neal, our folks from Neal Health Wellness Center, we're back there. There are some opportunities around town. We need you. We need you. We need your energy, your enthusiasm, your new ideas. We need you. We need your hands, okay? We have been invited on campus on numerous times to do testing and other events, and we welcome those events. The young lady that spoke about sports, believe it or not, many years ago, before the sports teams began to practice in the summer, they would call our staff in to educate the players about HIV risk. Is that not amazing? That's revolutionary. Who starts with football players? Nobody. That kind of went away. Of course, you know, staffs change, administrations change. That kind of went away. But those kind of organizations, the football teams, the fraternities, the sororities, the school groups, I mean, we want to be involved. You know, we can train folk to train folk. You know, we have a good relationship with another local college where we go in and we train peer counselors because we can't be everywhere, but those peer counselors go to that school, they're there every day. We train these peer counselors to be able to disperse accurate information about HIV services. We have door hangers. We put on all freshman doors to tell them where you can come get free testing, free condoms, free information, whatever you need. We need to expand that. We need to expand. This is a huge, huge resource, and we need to exploit that and take advantage of it. And we welcome you. I'm sure Neal Wellness Center will welcome you too. There's just numerous possibilities, and we would love to have you.
I would say this is piggybacking off of what Brandy said. I would say something that would be super beneficial, especially working with the college population, is to see if you can actually get in our classes. I know for the School of Social Work, we hardly have time to take care of ourselves, let alone go to something like this.
We accept all invitations.
Oh yeah, I believe it. But even like at, and maybe this is ignorant of me to say, but even when Dr. Kavanaugh told us that we were going to be coming up here for this presentation, I think a lot of us were like, why? Like, why? So I think if a college student just sees a flyer on the wall, they're not going to look twice at it. They're not going to feel the need to actually go and make a difference for something like this. Like, this is, I didn't even know it was considered an epidemic until this.
Wow. Yeah. And do you know there's actually another event going on almost at the same time that I was asked to come to. I had to turn it down because Dr. Wooten asked me first. But, but you know, I was trying to find someone to send there because that's another group of students who will be getting some similar information.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, going off of what both of you all had said, there's always a way. And I say that because in my pharmacy school, so I went to Presbyterian College in Clinton, right up the road. I grew up in Orangeburg, so this is home for me. So this is home for me. But at Presbyterian, it's a faith-based school. So at the pharmacy school, I was part of an organization, and I later became the president. But for us, our main initiative was HIV. So our battle was, how do we tackle HIV in this environment? And what we did was, it wasn't the poster on the wall. You're absolutely correct. We fought and fought, but for us, it was a table set up in the commons area with balloons and bags. Bags had candy and condoms. And it took a few times,
But what we started doing is we went to the sports, we went to the football players, and the football players came to know our organization as the condom people. That's fine. That's okay, because when you grab that bag, you're going to hear not just about HIV, but you're going to hear about syphilis and everything else. And then it went from not just the football team to catching the fraternities and sororities, catching the freshmen, because they're just getting out of mom and daddy's house and they're going buck wild and they want to sleep with everybody and they forget what can happen. So there's always a way. There's always a way. There's always an opportunity. Maybe it is through the football team. Maybe it is through a sport. Maybe it is getting that candy and condoms. But you have to find that opportunity to educate. Because one thing we talked about with the South, you can't just stand on the corner with a bullhorn and say, you know, get tested for HIV, or put a flyer on a wall. But you find what works for you. Maybe it's collaborating with the medical school and the pharmacy school. Maybe it's you all combining together and using your resources to provide educational events. Maybe it's having a game night. For us, it was having an open discussion. When they got that bag, they also were invited to a trivia night. Trivia night, they got 5 bonus credit points on the next test or something. If they came to the trivia night, that was one thing. Then the next night, we were like, oh, by the way, we're having a game night. And at the game night, we're discussing HIV in our age population and what we're going to do about it. And then the next night, oh, we're having something else. So having those different, we may not be the generation to have a forum.
So since I'm mindful of time, I'm going to have 2 hands, and I'm going to have Dr. Boom come up for whatever transition she wants to do, or continue, blah, blah, blah. So, because it's 7:32, but not much. So, the 2 hands, the lady here and there, and Dr. Boom, if you can come up and close out.
I was just going to say a really good resource for you guys if you wanted to reach out to athletes would be the National Alliance of Social Workers in Sports. It is a new alliance that has formed, and they have really good connections with NFL players as well as collegiate athletes. But also what I was going to say is before freshmen come into USC, there is like an orientation you do have to take called Alcohol EDU. And I think it would be really great if we got a sexual health, another thing in there that they have to take, and another test. It could be small, but at least they would be informed and they would know about what HIV is, because you know, some of us in this room are seniors and we didn't even know, you know, HIV/AIDS was an epidemic. So I think that would be a really good opportunity.
So,
I was just going to say one more thing. To go off of what you said, when you said, you know, it's because of alcohol and that kind of thing. But what happened to cause that? There had to be a couple students that drank too much, fell off a building and died. Something had to happen. And it sounds funny, but that's the reality. I've been in this area long enough to know the stories. I went to Clemson for undergrad. I know USC and Clemson, what happens every freshman year? We have somebody who gets drunk, falls off of something, they die. And that had to happen in order for it to be made aware. What has to happen for that to happen?
I think that we should do something before that happens.
So last comment and then wrap it up. You know, I'm always sensitive to people's time. And you know, you set a reputation if you keep people longer than you promise. So yeah, so last word and then the wrap up. And if y'all want to meet informally, you know, there's a future thing.
I was just going to say a really big resource that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is more on our backs than like you guys as professionals, but student organizations are very active and prominent on campus, especially like at events and at fairs and student leadership and places where students can actually have the opportunity to partner with nonprofit groups that actually have this information. I know that the power of like student organizations has the power to direct education to like peers. So we feel like, you know, students are more likely to want to pay attention and want to help and want to listen to people that they are more likely to relate to and can unite with. So I feel like going into classrooms would be one thing, but like really utilizing the power that like students have to come together and, you know, reach out to their peers, I think it has a very, and like I said, that's not really a responsibility that you guys have, but like fostering that and, you know, suggesting it, inspiring it in other students, I think is a very big step.
Dr. Wooten?
All right, well, let's give our panel a round of applause. I really appreciate you all accepting our invitation and coming out tonight and sharing all this wealth of knowledge with our community here in the College of Social Work. And we have community leaders here, we have students here as well, and we have some faculty here as well. And what I really appreciate people is you all sharing all of your ideas about what we can do next. So I say to you, to be continued in the spring, we are capturing all our ideas. We have the students in the back who are capturing the ideas from this evening. Lessons learned, what you all want to hear from us next, maybe even some of our community stakeholders. But to be continued in the spring, we will capture them. We're planning to write them up and share them with the community. We also want to thank Dr. Kavanaugh for allowing her class to come and join us as well. If you want to hear more about your ideas, so you can drop me an email and let me know what your thoughts are and how excited you are about what we can do next. I once again want to thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate you all, and to drop your surveys on the table on your way out as you leave. Thank you. Oh yeah, and we also have our video tonight. It will probably be on the YouTube channel of the College of Social Work in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Can I just say one?
Yes, Dr. Lefkoff.
I would like us all to thank Dr. Wooten for